The girl chose to skip lunch to help her struggling mother. But when she saved a lost dog in the storm, she never imagined it would end her family's hardships forever. Sarah Johnson stared at the dripping ceiling of their Bronx apartment. Another brown stain had formed overnight, right above the kitchen counter where she stood making her own breakfast. The leak made a steady plop-plop sound into the pot she'd placed to catch the water. She glanced at the clock. 6:15 a.m. Her mother wouldn't be home for another hour from her night cleaning job. Sarah poured the last of their cereal into a chipped bowl, added the remaining milk, and ate quickly while standing. The apartment was quiet except for the dripping water and the rumble of early morning traffic outside. Her mother's second job started at 9 a.m. Sarah needed to leave for school soon, but first she checked their stack of bills on the kitchen table. Another red notice had appeared yesterday. She pulled it out, reading the bold letters. Final warning, electricity disconnection notice. Her hands shook as she folded it and stuffed it deep into her backpack. Her mother didn't need to see this one. "Baby, that you?" Her mother's tired voice came from the bedroom. Sarah quickly zipped her backpack. "Yeah, Mom? Just getting ready for school." Lisa Johnson appeared in the doorway, still wearing her cleaning company uniform. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "You eat something?" "Yeah, it's cereal." Sarah didn't mention it was the last of it. "Good girl." Lisa slumped against the doorframe. "Sorry I couldn't make you proper breakfast today. That office building downtown took longer than usual." "It's okay, Mom. You should sleep." Lisa tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "Got your lunch money?" Sarah nodded, though the crumpled $5 bill in her pocket would go straight into their emergency jar, just like yesterday's and the day before. "I'm good." Her mother crossed the small living room and hugged her. Sarah breathed in the familiar smell of cleaning products and exhaustion. "You're such a good girl, Sarah. Don't know what I'd do without you." Sarah hugged back tight, careful not to let her mother feel how she was trembling. "Got to go, Mom? Don't want to be late." "Wait." Lisa reached for her purse. "Let me give you extra for lunch." "No," Sarah said too quickly. I'm good. Really. Save it for the bills." Her mother's face fell slightly, but she nodded. "Okay, baby. Have a good day at school." Sarah grabbed her worn yellow raincoat from the hook by the door. It was too small now, the sleeves ending above her wrists, but it was better than nothing. Outside, dark clouds were gathering. At school, Sarah's stomach growled through morning classes. She ignored it, just like she ignored Tanya Miller showing off her new iPhone and Jessica Chin talking about her upcoming birthday party. During lunch period, she sat in the library pretending to study while watching other kids eat in the cafeteria. Mrs. Reynolds, the librarian, approached her table. "Sarah, aren't you going to eat lunch?" "Already ate," Sarah lied, patting her stomach. "Just working on homework." The librarian frowned, but didn't push it. Sarah had gotten good at lying about lunch. After school, the sky had turned an angry gray. Other kids rushed past her, heading home before the rain started. Sarah walked slowly, counting the money she'd saved this week. $25 from skipped lunches. Maybe it would be enough to keep the lights on for another month. Thunder rumbled overhead. The first drops hit her face as she passed the convenience store where they used to buy ice cream on Sundays, before her father left. She still remembered that morning 3 years ago. He'd been wearing his good shirt, said he was going to look for work. Her mother had made pancakes. Sarah had asked him to bring home chocolate ice cream. He never came back. The rain fell harder now. Sarah pulled her too small raincoat tighter, but water still seeped in at the sleeves. Her worn sneakers squelched with every step. The streets emptied as people ducked into shops or hurried to the subway station. Lightning flashed, followed by a crack of thunder that made her jump. The storm was getting worse. Sarah thought about her mother, probably cleaning offices downtown right now, worrying about the rent they couldn't pay, the electricity they might lose, the food they were running out of. The weight of the disconnection notice seemed to burn in her backpack. 3 blocks to go. Just 3 more blocks, and she'd be home. Maybe she could start dinner with whatever was left in the cupboards. Maybe. A sound cut through the drumming rain. A whimper, soft and scared, coming from the alley between Martinez Grocery and the old laundromat. Sarah stopped. Another whimper, followed by a quiet scratch against metal. She peered into the alley. Water streamed down the brick walls and gathered in dirty puddles. Behind a dented garbage can, something moved. Sarah stepped closer. Lightning flashed again, illuminating a pair of frightened eyes and wet fur. A dog, shivering and alone in the storm. The traffic light changed behind her, casting alternate red and green glows into the alley. Sarah checked her watch. Her mother would worry if she was late. The sensible thing would be to go home, get dry, start dinner. But the dog whimpered again, and Sarah remembered how it felt to be alone and scared, watching someone walk away. She took a step into the alley. Thunder boomed overhead, and the rain poured down even harder, soaking through her yellow raincoat as she made her choice. The dog pressed itself further behind the garbage can as Sarah approached. Rain drummed against the metal, creating a hollow echo in the alley. "Hey," Sarah said softly, crouching down. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The dog growled low in its throat. It was bigger than she'd first thought, some kind of terrier mix with matted black and brown fur. A red collar hung loose around its neck. "You got a home somewhere, don't you?" Sarah inched closer. "Someone's probably looking for you." Lightning flashed. The dog yelped and tried to squeeze further into the narrow space between the can and the wall. Sarah noticed it was favoring its right front paw. "You're hurt." She reached in her backpack and pulled out the sandwich she'd been saving for dinner. Peanut butter on her mom's homemade bread, the last they had in the apartment. "Here. You hungry?" The dog's nose twitched. Sarah unwrapped the sandwich slowly, tore off a piece, and tossed it toward the garbage can. The dog watched it land, but didn't move. "Come on," Sarah coaxed. "It's good." Mom made the bread herself. Water ran down her face and neck, soaking through her coat. Her shoes were completely waterlogged now, but she stayed still, holding another piece of sandwich. The dog took a tentative step forward, sniffed the first piece, and gulped it down. Sarah tossed another bit, this one landing closer to her. "That's it," she whispered. Just like that, a car horn blasted on the street, making them both jump. The dog retreated halfway, behind the can. No, it's okay." Sarah held out more sandwich. "Look, I'm still here. Nothing bad's going to happen." The rain seemed to be getting worse, if that was possible. Water pooled around her feet, carrying bits of trash toward the storm drain. Sarah's teeth started to chatter. "I get it," she said through chattering teeth. Being scared, not knowing who to trust. She thought about the disconnection notice in her backpack, her mother working 2 jobs, the unpaid rent. Sometimes everything feels like too much, right? The dog watched her, head tilted slightly. "My dad left," Sarah continued, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Just walked away. Mom says it wasn't my fault, but sometimes I wonder, you know?" She tossed another piece of sandwich, this one landing just a foot away from her. The dog crept forward, watching her carefully. "I don't tell Mom when I skip lunch," Sarah said, "or about the kids at school with their new phones and birthday parties. She works so hard already. Doesn't need more to worry about." The dog was close enough now that Sarah could see its ribcage through the wet fur. It finished the piece of sandwich and looked at her expectantly. "Last bit," Sarah said, holding out her hand with the final piece. "We can share it." The dog hesitated, then took a step forward. "Another." Sarah held perfectly still as it sniffed her fingers, then gently took the bread from her hand. "Good boy," she whispered. "Or girl. Sorry, I haven't checked." She slowly reached toward the collar. The dog tensed but didn't move away. Sarah's fingers touched wet metal, a tag hanging from the collar. "Let's see who you belong to." Before she could read the tag, the dog suddenly jerked away. Sarah lost her balance, landing hard on her knees in a puddle. "Wait," she called as the dog limped toward the alley entrance. "Your paws hurt. Let me help." She scrambled to her feet and followed, water squishing in her shoes. The dog stopped at the alley entrance, looking back at her uncertainly. "Please," Sarah said. "I won't hurt you. Promise." Thunder cracked directly overhead. The dog yelped and darted back toward Sarah, pressing against her legs. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around it. "It's okay," she soothed, feeling the dog tremble against her. "I've got you." The dog's fur was cold and wet against her skin, but it didn't try to pull away. Sarah could feel its rapid heartbeat. "See? Not so scary together, right?" She checked her watch and winced. 4:45 p.m. She should have been home 15 minutes ago, starting dinner, maybe trying to fix that leak in the kitchen. Mom's gonna worry, she told the dog. But I can't leave you here. Not in this storm. Not with that hurt paw. The dog looked up at her with brown eyes that seemed to understand everything. Sarah took off her raincoat and tried to wrap it around the dog. You need this more than me right now. The coat was too small to cover the dog completely, but it was better than nothing. Sarah positioned it to at least keep the rain off the dog's head and back. Okay, she said, taking a deep breath. Let's try picking you up. Just don't bite me, all right? She slid one arm under the dog's chest and the other under its back legs. The dog tensed but didn't resist. 1, 2. Sarah lifted. The dog was heavier than she expected, and her arms immediately began to shake. 3. She managed to get the dog up against her chest. Water ran down her face and arms, her shirt completely soaked now without the raincoat. Right? She panted. Home's just 2 blocks away. We could do this. Sarah took one step toward the street, then another. The dog stayed still in her arms, though she could feel it shivering. Almost there, she promised, though her arms were already burning from the weight. Just got to. She stopped. A man in an expensive suit stood at the end of the alley, staring at them. Rain darkened his shoulders and ran down his face, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes were fixed on the dog in Sarah's arms. Max, the man called out. Is that my dog? The dog's head lifted at the voice. Sarah's arms tightened instinctively around the wet bundle. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the man's face as he took a step toward them. Sarah's arms trembled under the dog's weight as the man approached. Water streamed down her face, and her soaked clothes clung to her skin. Max, the man called again. It is you, isn't it, boy? The dog's tail twitched, but it didn't bark or try to jump from Sarah's arms. She took a step back. Wait, please, the man said, stopping several feet away. I've been looking for him all day. His voice cracked slightly. He got scared by the garbage truck this morning and ran off. Sarah studied the man's face in the dim alley light. His tie was crooked, and his expensive suit was soaked through. Despite his size, there was something tired and worried in his expression that made him seem less threatening. He's hurt, Sarah said, her voice smaller than she intended. His front paw. The man's face creased with concern. Is it bad? Don't think so. But he was limping. Thunder rumbled overhead. Sarah shivered violently, her teeth chattering. You must be freezing, the man said. He glanced at her yellow raincoat wrapped around the dog. Here? He shrugged off his suit jacket and held it out. Sarah shook her head. I'm okay. Please. You're soaked through. He draped the jacket over her shoulders somehow, even with her arms full of wet dog. It was warm from his body and smelled like expensive cologne. I'm Jonathan Thompson, he said, taking another careful step closer. Max is my dog. I live in the building just around the corner. The Bradley Arms. Sarah knew the building. It was one of the fancy new ones with a doorman and polished brass fixtures. She'd walked past it many times, imagining what it would be like to live somewhere without leaky ceilings or drafty windows. I'm Sarah, she said finally. Sarah Johnson. Thank you for helping him, Sarah. Mr. Thompson's voice was gentle. Not many people would stop in weather like this. The dog, Max, shifted in her arms, whining softly. Her muscles screamed in protest. Here, let me take him, Mr. Thompson offered, reaching out. Sarah hesitated. The familiar weight of the disconnection notice pressed against her back through her wet backpack. Her mother would be worried sick by now. I should get home, she said, but didn't move to hand over the dog. Where do you live? I can give you a ride. He must have seen her expression because he quickly added, or I can call you a cab. Whatever makes you comfortable. Sarah's arms shook harder. Max was getting heavier by the second. The building on Webster, she admitted. The red brick one. That's on my way. Mr. Thompson pulled out his phone, protected in a waterproof case. Let me call my driver. Your driver? He smiled slightly. Company car. One of the perks of being CEO. He pressed a button on his phone. James? Yes. Could you bring the car around to the alley beside Martinez Grocery? And bring some towels if we have them. Sarah shifted her weight from foot to foot, trying to keep her arms from giving out. She should run. That's what her mother always taught her. Don't trust strangers, especially rich ones. But Max was so heavy, and she was so cold, and home was still blocks away. Car's coming, Mr. Thompson said, putting his phone away. May I? He held out his arms for Max. Sarah looked down at the dog. His brown eyes met hers, calm now, no longer showing the fear from earlier. It's okay, she whispered, not sure if she was reassuring Max or herself. Carefully, she transferred the dog to Mr. Thompson's arms. Max immediately licked his face. You had me worried sick, boy, Mr. Thompson said softly. Then he looked at Sarah. Thank you. Really? A black car with tinted windows pulled up to the alley entrance. A uniformed driver got out with an umbrella and several fluffy towels. Miss Johnson needs a ride home, James, Mr. Thompson said. The Webster Avenue building. Of course, sir. James held out a towel to Sarah. She took it with trembling hands. The fabric was softer than anything they had at home. Your raincoat, she remembered, reaching for where it still draped over Max. Keep it on him for now, Mr. Thompson said. You can get it back once we get you home. Sarah hesitated at the car's open door. Every warning her mother had ever given her about strangers rang in her head. But she was so cold, so tired, and something about the way Mr. Thompson looked at Max, the genuine worry in his voice when he asked about the injured paw. Thunder crashed overhead, making the final decision for her. Sarah slid into the car's warm interior. Mr. Thompson settled in beside her, still cradling Max. Webster Avenue, James. As the car pulled away from the curb, Sarah caught her reflection in the tinted window. Her hair was plastered to her face, her clothes were dripping on the leather seats, and she was wrapped in a towel that probably cost more than their monthly grocery budget. Her mother was going to kill her. The car turned onto Webster Avenue, and Sarah's stomach clenched. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could make out a familiar figure pacing in front of their building. Her mother had come home early. Sarah sank lower in the seat, but it was too late. The car was already slowing to a stop. Is that your mom? Mr. Thompson asked quietly. Sarah nodded, clutching the towel tighter. Would you like me to explain about Max? Another nod. The car stopped. Through the window, Sarah watched her mother's expression change from worry to confusion to alarm as she saw the luxury vehicle. Ready? Mr. Thompson asked. Sarah took a deep breath and reached for the door handle. The rain was still pouring down, but somehow it didn't seem as cold and threatening as before. Maybe it was because she wasn't alone anymore. Lisa Johnson rushed toward the car, her cleaning uniform still damp from her own walk home. Sarah? Baby? Is that you? Sarah stepped out into the rain, Mr. Thompson's towel still wrapped around her shoulders. Mom, I can explain. Where have you been? I've been calling and calling. Her mother stopped short as Mr. Thompson emerged from the other side of the car, still holding Max. Who are you? Jonathan Thompson, ma'am. He shifted Max to one arm and extended his hand. Your daughter helped find my lost dog. Lisa didn't take his hand. Her eyes darted between Sarah, Mr. Thompson, and the luxury car idling at the curb. Sarah, come here. Mom, it's okay. He's just Ash now, Sarah. Sarah crossed to her mother, who immediately pulled her close. She could feel her mother's heart racing. Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Thompson said carefully, I understand your concern, but I want you to know your daughter did something extraordinary today. Did she? Lisa's voice was tight. And you decided to thank her by putting her in your car without her mother's permission? Rain streamed down Mr. Thompson's face, but he held Lisa's gaze. You're absolutely right. I should have had Sarah call you first. I apologize for that. He glanced down at Max. I was so relieved to find my dog that I didn't think it through properly. Max whimpered softly, drawing Lisa's attention to his injured paw. The dog's hurt. Some of the edge left her voice. Yes, Sarah said quickly. He was hiding behind a garbage can, Mom. I couldn't just leave him there. Of course you couldn't. Lisa sighed, brushing wet hair from Sarah's face. But baby, you know better than to get in cars with strangers. I know. I'm sorry. But Mr. Thompson seemed nice, and I was so cold, and Max was so heavy. Max! My dog, Mr. Thompson explained. He ran away this morning when a garbage truck backfired. I've been searching all day. He shifted uncomfortably in his wet clothes. Would it be all right if we continued this conversation inside? I'd like to check Max's paw properly, and Sarah's shivering. Lisa hesitated, looking at their rundown building. We don't. Please, Mom. Sarah pressed closer. Just for a minute. A police car cruised slowly past, its wipers fighting the downpour. Lisa watched it pass, then nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes, she said. James, was it? She addressed the driver. You can go. Actually, Mr. Thompson said, James lives in the building just down the block. He often parks the car here anyway. He turned to the driver. That's right, isn't it, James? Yes, sir. Number 442. James tipped his hat to Lisa. Evening, ma'am. Lisa's shoulders relaxed slightly. Having a neighbor involved, even one she didn't know, seemed to ease her mind. They climbed the 4 flights to the Johnsons' apartment, their footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Sarah noticed Mr. Thompson looking at the peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights, but his expression remained neutral. At their door, Lisa fumbled with her keys. It's not much, she said stiffly. It's home, Mr. Thompson replied simply. The apartment felt smaller than usual with Mr. Thompson's tall frame filling the doorway. Sarah watched his eyes take in the water-stained ceiling, the mismatched furniture, the pot-catching drips in the kitchen. Max squirmed in his arms, and Mr. Thompson set him gently on the floor. The dog immediately limped to Sarah, pressing against her legs. He likes you, Mr. Thompson said softly. Sarah. Lisa's voice was firm. Go change into dry clothes before you catch cold. But Mom, dash now, please. Sarah reluctantly headed to her room, leaving her mother alone with Mr. Thompson. She changed quickly, pressing her ear to the door. Works construction? Her mother's voice. No, I own Thompson Enterprises. The cleaning service company. A pause. The one with the green uniforms? The big office downtown. That's us. We're expanding into property management now. Actually, dash. Sarah's wet shoes squeaked as she came back into the living room, cutting off their conversation. Max thumped his tail against the floor. Mr. Thompson was examining the dog's paw while Lisa stood nearby, arms crossed. Just a mild sprain, I think, he said. Nothing broken. Good, Lisa said. Now, Mr. Thompson dash, please call me Jonathan. Mr. Thompson. Lisa's voice was firm. While we appreciate you bringing Sarah home, a loud drip from the ceiling interrupted her. Water splashed into the pot, creating a hollow echo. Mr. Thompson looked up at the growing stain. How long has that leak been there? That's not your concern. Lisa's cheeks flushed. As I was saying, dash, 3 months, Sarah said. The super keeps promising to fix it, but he never does. Sarah. Her mother's voice cracked like a whip. Have you filed a complaint? Mr. Thompson asked, his tone casual as he stroked Max's fur. Lisa laughed bitterly. With who? The landlord doesn't care. We're lucky he even lets us stay. With... She stopped abruptly. With the late rent? Mr. Thompson's voice was gentle. I noticed the eviction warning on the bulletin board downstairs. Sarah's stomach clenched. She hadn't known about that one. Mr. Thompson. Lisa drew herself up. I appreciate you bringing Sarah home safely. But our financial situation is none of your business. You're right, it's not. He stood slowly. But maybe I can make it my business. Excuse me? My company's looking for an executive assistant. Someone organized, hardworking, used to managing multiple tasks. He pulled out a business card. Someone like you, Mrs. Johnson. Lisa stared at the card but didn't take it. You don't know anything about me. I know you work 2 jobs. He nodded toward her uniform. I know you're raising a daughter who stops to help injured animals in the rain, even when she's cold and tired herself. That tells me a lot about how you've raised her. Sarah held her breath. Her mother's hands were trembling slightly. This isn't charity, Mr. Thompson continued. It's a real position. Good salary, benefits, regular hours. He set the card on their scratch coffee table. Just come in for an interview. That's all I'm asking. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the apartment's shabby interior. In that brief moment of brightness, Sarah saw something she hadn't seen on her mother's face in a long time. Hope. Lisa picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed letters. I don't have the right clothes for an interview. We're what you have. I care about ability, not appearance. Mr. Thompson checked his watch. I should get Max to the vet before they close. Sarah, thank you again for finding him. Sarah knelt to hug the dog goodbye. Max licked her face. Mrs. Johnson? Mr. Thompson paused at the door. The interview's at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Ask for me at reception." He smiled slightly. "And bring Sarah's yellow raincoat." Max seems attached to it. After he left, Sarah and her mother stood in silence, listening to his footsteps fade down the stairs. "Mom?" Sarah finally whispered. "Are you mad?" Lisa looked at the business card in her hand, then at her daughter. "No, baby." She pulled Sarah into a tight hug. "Just scared." "Of what?" "Of hoping." Lisa kissed the top of her head. "Now, tell me exactly how you found that dog." Outside, the rain continued to fall, but somehow the apartment felt a little warmer, a little less empty, as Sarah began to tell her story. The next morning, Sarah sat in Mr. Thompson's office lobby, her feet barely touching the polished floor. The chair was leather, nothing like the plastic seats at school. Her mother sat beside her, wearing her cleanest uniform, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mrs. Johnson?" A receptionist called. "Mr. Thompson will see you now." Lisa stood, smoothing her uniform. "Sarah, wait here." Actually, Mr. Thompson appeared in his office doorway. "I'd like Sarah to join us, if that's okay." Sarah watched her mother hesitate. Even in her best uniform, Lisa looked out of place among the designer suits and clicking heels. "Come on, Mom," Sarah whispered, taking her hand. "It'll be okay." The office was huge, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Max lay in a plush bed near the desk, his paw wrapped in a white bandage. His tail thumped when he saw Sarah. "Please sit." Mr. Thompson gestured to 2 chairs. "How's the apartment? Any more leaks after the storm?" "We manage," Lisa said stiffly. Sarah moved to pet Max while the adults talked. She could feel the tension in her mother's voice. "Mrs. Johnson," Mr. Thompson began, "tell me about your current jobs." "I clean. Office buildings, mostly." Lisa's hands twisted in her lap. "Night shift downtown, day shift in the Bronx. And before that, more cleaning. Different companies." Lisa's chin lifted slightly. "I'm good at what I do, Mr. Thompson." "I believe you are." He leaned forward. "But that's not all you've done, is it?" Lisa glanced at Sarah, then back at Mr. Thompson. "I don't understand." "Sarah mentioned yesterday that you help manage the building's maintenance requests. Handle complaints, coordinate with the super, track repairs. Someone has to." Lisa's voice was quiet. "The super drinks. Things don't get fixed unless someone stays on top of it. And the payment plans for other tenants? The ones behind on rent?" Lisa stiffened. "How did you dash?" "I made some calls this morning. Spoke to your landlord." Mr. Thompson smiled slightly. "He said you're the only reason some families haven't been evicted. You help them set up payment schedules, find extra work, navigate assistance programs." Sarah watched her mother's face flush. She'd never heard anyone talk about this part of what her mom did. "You also managed a small cleaning crew at your last job," Mr. Thompson continued. "Handled scheduling, supplies, client complaints, all while working the actual cleaning shifts yourself." "I did what needed doing." Lisa's voice cracked slightly. "What's your point?" "My point, Mrs. Johnson, is that you've been doing executive assistant work for years. You just haven't been paid for it." Silence filled the office. Even Max seemed to be holding his breath. "I don't have a degree," Lisa finally said. "No formal training. Neither did I when I started." Mr. Thompson stood and walked to the window. "Know how I built this company? Started with 1 mop and a bucket. Cleaned offices at night, just like you. Learned the business from the ground up." He turned back to face them. "Now I have contracts with half the buildings in Manhattan. Know what I don't have? Someone who understands both sides, the corporate offices and the cleaning crews. Someone who knows what it's like to actually do the work." Sarah watched her mother's hands slowly unclench. "The position pays $75,000 a year to start," Mr. Thompson said. "Full health insurance, 401k with matching, paid vacation." Lisa made a small sound, quickly stifled. "And," he continued, "flexible hours. No more night shifts. No more missing dinner with your daughter." Sarah's heart pounded. That was more money than they'd ever had. More than enough for rent, for food, for new clothes. "Why?" Lisa's voice was barely audible. "Why me?" Mr. Thompson glanced at Sarah, then back to Lisa. "Because yesterday, your daughter found my dog in the rain. She was cold, wet, probably scared. But instead of walking away, she stayed. Shared her food with him. Carried him 4 blocks. He sat down again, leaning forward. That kind of character comes from somewhere, Mrs. Johnson. She learned it from you. Lisa wiped her eyes quickly. I don't want charity. Good. Because this isn't charity. This is business. He pulled out a contract. I need someone who can handle difficult situations, manage multiple priorities, and never lose sight of the human element. Everything in your background tells me you can do that. Sarah held her breath as her mother stared at the contract. When would I start? Lisa finally asked. Monday. We'll get you trained on the computer systems, introduce you to the key clients. He paused. And I'll talk to the landlord about those repairs. Mr. Thompson dashed, Jonathan, please. And that's not charity either. We're expanding into property management, remember? Your building could be a good investment. Just needs proper maintenance. Sarah couldn't hold back anymore. Mom, please? Say yes. Lisa looked at her daughter, then at the contract, then at Mr. Thompson. I'll need a week to give notice of my other jobs. Of course. Mr. Thompson smiled. Welcome aboard, Mrs. Johnson. Lisa, her mother said softly. If we're going to work together, you should call me Lisa. Sarah let out the breath she'd been holding. Max limped over and put his head in her lap, as if he understood everything. One more thing, Mr. Thompson said, reaching into his desk. He pulled out Sarah's yellow raincoat, clean and neatly folded. Max insisted on returning this personally. Sarah took the coat, feeling the worn fabric. Yesterday, it had seemed like a symbol of everything they couldn't afford to replace. Now it felt like something else. Something like hope. Sarah? Mr. Thompson's voice was gentle. Would you like to take Max for a walk sometimes? When your homework's done, of course. Sarah looked at her mother, who nodded slowly. I'd like that, Sarah said. I'd like that a lot. Outside the office windows, the sun broke through the clouds, turning the puddles from yesterday's storm into mirrors reflecting the sky. Sarah watched a flock of pigeons soar past, their wings catching the light. For the first time in years, tomorrow didn't seem so scary anymore. The elevator ride to their floor felt longer than usual. Sarah watched her mother clutch the contract folder, knuckles white against the manila paper. You okay, Mom? Lisa jumped slightly. Just thinking, baby, about the job, about everything. Lisa's voice was tight. The training, the computers, the clients. She trailed off as the elevator doors opened. Their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was in the hallway, struggling with her groceries. She looked up as they approached. Lisa, Sarah, where are you two dressed up for? Before Lisa could answer, Sarah burst out. Mom got a new job. A really good one. With Dash, Sarah. Her mother's warning tone cut her off. Mrs. Rodriguez raised her eyebrows. New job? Not more cleaning. It's... Lisa hesitated. It's an office position. Office. Mrs. Rodriguez laughed. You? No offense, Lisa, but since when do you know about offices? Sarah felt her mother stiffen beside her. Since always, Sarah said firmly. Mom knows lots about offices. She's been managing this whole building forever. Managing? Is that what you call helping that drunk super do his job? Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. Listen, Lisa, don't get your hopes up. These fancy companies, they make big promises, but Dash, we need to go. Lisa interrupted, fumbling with their keys. Inside the apartment, Lisa dropped the contract folder on the kitchen table and gripped the back of a chair. Mom, she's right. Lisa's voice shook. What am I thinking? I don't belong in an office. I don't know anything about computers or business or Dash. Stop it. Sarah grabbed her mother's hands. You know everything about business. You run this whole building. That's different, baby. No, it's not. Mr. Thompson said so. He said you've been doing assistant work for years, just without getting paid for it. Lisa pulled away, pacing the small living room. Mr. Thompson doesn't know what he's talking about. He saw a poor cleaning lady with a kid and felt sorry for us. That's not true. He needs you. He said so. Sarah, you don't understand. People like us, we don't just get jobs like this. There's always a catch. Always Dash can knock at the door, cut her off. They both froze. Mrs. Johnson? It's Jonathan Thompson. Lisa shot a panicked look at Sarah. What's he doing here? Another knock. I forgot to give you the employee handbook. And Max insisted on visiting Sarah. Sarah moved toward the door, but her mother caught her arm. Mom, Sarah whispered, you can't hide from this. Please. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. Sarah opened the door. Mr. Thompson stood there with Max on a leash and a thick binder under his arm. He took in their expressions and frowned. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," Lisa said too quickly. "We were just Mom's scared," Sarah blurted. "She thinks you only offered her the job because you feel sorry for us." "Sarah." Lisa's face flushed dark red. "May I come in?" Mr. Thompson asked quietly. Lisa nodded stiffly. Max immediately went to Sarah, tail wagging. Mr. Thompson set the binder on the kitchen table, next to the contract folder. "Mrs. Johnson, Lisa, would you like to know why I really offered you this job?" Lisa said nothing, but her hands twisted together. "Last night, after I left, I called every tenant in this building. Know what they all said about you? That you're the only reason this place hasn't fallen apart. You track every maintenance request in a notebook. Keep copies of every complaint. Document every conversation with the landlord." He opened the binder. "Just like you'll need to do for our client buildings." "Show her, Sarah." Sarah looked inside. Pages of forms, maintenance logs, client contact sheets. They looked exactly like the notebooks her mother kept in the kitchen drawer. "You organized payment plans for struggling tenants," Mr. Thompson continued. "Negotiated with the landlord. Coordinated repairs. All while working 2 jobs and raising a daughter alone." He turned to another section. "These are the skills we look for in an executive assistant. Organization, documentation, problem solving, people management. You already have them all. But the computers," Lisa protested weakly, "can be learned. The important things, dedication, integrity, work ethic, those can't be taught." He smiled slightly. "You already train new cleaning staff, don't you? Show them the proper way to do things." Lisa nodded slowly. "That's management experience. Leadership." He closed the binder. "I'm not offering you this job out of pity, Lisa. I'm offering it because you're qualified. More qualified than most college graduates I interview." Sarah watched her mother's shoulders straighten slightly. "The truth is," Mr. Thompson continued, "I need someone who understands both worlds, the corporate office and the cleaning crews. Someone who can bridge that gap. Make sure neither side gets overlooked." He gestured to the contract. "But if you don't want the position, I understand. Just know that my offer isn't charity. It's business. Good business." The apartment was silent except for Max's tail thumping against the floor. Sarah held her breath. Lisa picked up the contract with trembling hands. "I'll need some pens for the cleaning staff. The cheap ones from the supply room always break." Mr. Thompson smiled. "First order of business Monday morning. And the maintenance request forms need updating. Half the boxes don't make sense. You can redesign them." Lisa took a deep breath. "I'm still scared." "Good," Mr. Thompson said. "Means you take it seriously." He pulled out a pen. "Ready to sign?" Lisa looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Then she picked up the pen and in one swift motion before she could change her mind, signed her name. "Welcome to Thompson Enterprises," Mr. Thompson said formally. Then he grinned. "Now, I believe Max is overdue for his walk," and Sarah promised to help. Sarah grabbed the leash, her heart feeling like it might burst. As she led Max to the door, she heard her mother ask quietly, "Did you really mean all that? About me being qualified?" "Every word," Mr. Thompson replied. "Just wait and see." Outside, the air was fresh from yesterday's rain. Sarah looked up at their building, at the window of their apartment where so many bills had piled up, where so many tears had been shed. Something was different now. Something had changed. Max tugged at his leash, ready to explore. Sarah smiled and followed him into their new beginning. Monday morning arrived with a brightness that had nothing to do with the weather. Sarah watched her mother get ready for her first day, wearing the new outfit Mr. Thompson's secretary had helped them pick out on Saturday. "How do I look?" Lisa smoothed the navy blazer nervously. "Like an executive assistant," Sarah said, grinning. She held up her mother's old cleaning uniform. "Want me to put this in storage?" Lisa touched the worn fabric. "No, keep it where we can see it. Remember where we came from?" Sarah folded the uniform carefully and placed it in their shared closet. "You're going to be amazing, Mom. From your mouth to God's ears." Lisa checked her watch. Another gift from Mr. Thompson's office. "Walk you to school?" "It's on my way now." Sarah's heart leaped. Her mother hadn't been able to walk her to school since taking the second cleaning job 2 years ago. Outside, the morning air was crisp. Other parents walked with their children, carrying briefcases and coffee cups. For the first time, Lisa looked like she belonged among them. "Sarah, wait up!" Tanya Miller ran to catch up, her new iPhone bouncing in her designer backpack. She stopped short when she saw Lisa. "Mrs. Johnson? Is that you?" "Good morning, Tanya." Lisa's voice was steady, though Sarah felt her grip tighten on her new purse. "You look different." Tanya's eyes widened. "Is that a Michael Kors bag?" "Mom's starting her new job today," Sarah said proudly. "She's an executive assistant at Thompson Enterprises." "Thompson Enterprises?" Tanya's father appeared behind her. "Jonathan Thompson's company?" "Yes," Lisa said. "I start today." Mr. Miller looked Lisa up and down. "Interesting. I handle their legal work sometimes. Never seen you in the office." "That's because today's my first day, Mr. Miller." Lisa's chin lifted slightly. "Perhaps we'll run into each other." "Perhaps." His tone suggested doubt. "Come on, Tanya. Don't want to be late." As they walked away, Sarah felt her mother's steps falter. "Mom, you okay?" "Just wondering if everyone's going to look at me like that." Lisa's voice trembled slightly. "Like what?" "Like I don't belong." Sarah squeezed her mother's hand. "Mr. Thompson says you do. And he owns the whole company." They reached the school gates. Other parents were saying goodbye, heading off to their own jobs. Lisa hesitated. "Want me to walk you to the office?" Sarah offered. Lisa laughed, some of the tension leaving her face. "Isn't that supposed to be my line? We could take turns now." Her mother hugged her tight. "I love you, baby. So much." "Love you too, Mom. Show them what you can do." Sarah watched her mother walk away, head high in her new clothes. Then she turned to enter the school building. "Sarah Johnson?" Mrs. Reynolds, the librarian, stood at the door. "Could you come with me for a moment?" Sarah followed her to the library, stomach tightening. Had someone noticed she wasn't buying lunch anymore? "I heard about your mother's new job," Mrs. Reynolds said, closing the door. "And about what you did with your lunch money." Sarah looked at the floor. Why didn't you tell me you needed help?" "We don't need help anymore," Sarah said quickly. "Mom's got a good job now." "I know. But before." Mrs. Reynolds' voice was gentle. "We have programs for students who need lunch assistance." No one would have known. Sarah thought about all those hungry afternoons, the rumbling in her stomach during math class. "I didn't want Mom to feel bad. Your mother should be proud. She raised a daughter who thinks of others first." Mrs. Reynolds reached into her desk. "Which is why I recommended you for this." She handed Sarah a glossy brochure. "Thompson Enterprises Youth Leadership Program." Mr. Thompson called the school this morning. They're starting a new program for middle school students. Community service, mentoring, college prep. Full scholarship for those who complete it. Sarah's hands shook as she read the brochure. "But why me?" "Because apparently someone important noticed your character." Mrs. Reynolds smiled. "The application just needs a parent's signature." Sarah clutched the brochure to her chest. "Can I show Mom at dinner tonight?" "Dinner?" Mrs. Reynolds looked confused. "Yeah." Sarah grinned. "Mom's home for dinner now." The morning classes flew by. At lunch period, Sarah started toward the library out of habit, then stopped. She had lunch money now, real lunch money, not savings for bills. In the cafeteria, she bought a hot lunch and sat at a table near the window. The food was nothing special, just cafeteria pizza and fruit, but it tasted better than anything she'd ever eaten. Her phone buzzed. Another new thing. A simple model Mr. Thompson insisted every employee's family should have for emergencies. A text from her mother. "First client meeting done. They like my ideas about the maintenance forms having lunch with the office team. Love you." Sarah texted back a heart emoji, then looked around the cafeteria. Tanya Miller sat with her usual group, showing off her phone. But at a table near the back, Sarah noticed Amy Chun eating alone. Amy's father had lost his job last month. Sarah had overheard her parents talking about it in the hallway. Picking up her tray, Sarah walked over. "This seat taken?" Amy looked up in surprise. "No. You want to sit here?" "Sure." Sarah sat down. "Hey, want half my cookie?" "It's too big for one person." Amy's eyes lit up as Sarah broke the cookie in half. And suddenly Sarah understood something her mother had said that morning about remembering where they came from. Sometimes the best opportunities weren't the ones you got, but the ones you could give to others. After school, Sarah took her usual route home. But this time she stopped at Thompson Enterprises. The doorman smiled and waved her in. She had her own ID badge now, marking her as an employee's family member. In the lobby, Max was waiting with Mr. Thompson. The dog's tail wagged furiously when he saw her. "Ready for your walk?" Mr. Thompson asked. "Your mom's in a meeting, but she'll be done soon." Sarah knelt to hug Max, feeling the solid warmth of his fur. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for everything." He looked at her for a long moment. "No, Sarah. Thank you for showing me what real character looks like." Sarah clipped Max's leash to his collar, the brochure for the youth leadership program tucked safely in her backpack. Outside, the afternoon sun turned the building's windows into gold. "Come on, Max," she said. "Let's go wait for Mom." The dog trotted happily beside her as they walked around the block. Sarah noticed he wasn't limping anymore. Sometimes, she thought, the best healing happened when you weren't looking for it. 1 month into Lisa's new job, Sarah woke to an unfamiliar sound: silence. No dripping water, no creaking pipes. The ceiling above her bed was smooth and freshly painted, the water stains gone. She padded to the kitchen in her new pajamas, bought from a real department store instead of the discount outlet. Her mother stood at the counter, making breakfast. "Morning, baby. French toast okay?" Sarah stared at the plate of golden brown slices. "You're cooking breakfast?" "First time in years I've had the energy." Lisa flipped another piece in the pan. Amazing what a good night's sleep can do. The kitchen looked different. New curtains hung at the window, and the stack of unpaid bills was gone from the table. In their place sat a laptop, Lisa's work computer, which she was learning to use with determination and growing confidence. "Mom, is that coffee?" Lisa grinned. "Mr. Thompson's assistant showed me how to use the fancy machine in the break room. Now I'm addicted." She sipped from a Thompson Enterprises mug. "Don't tell him, but I think I like being an assistant more than being a cleaner." "Why?" "Because now I can fix things properly. Remember Mrs. Rodriguez's leaky faucet? Called the maintenance team yesterday. It's being fixed this morning." Sarah sat down as her mother placed a plate of French toast in front of her. "Is that why it's so quiet?" "They fixed our leaks first." Mr. Thompson's orders. Lisa sat across from her. "Eat up. We're both going to be late." Sarah took a bite. The toast was perfect, crispy outside, soft inside, just the right amount of cinnamon. Like her grandmother used to make, before they couldn't afford real breakfast anymore. "Got everything for school? New notebooks?" Sarah nodded, thinking of her full backpack. No more rationing paper or sharing textbooks. "Youth Leadership Program meeting after school today." "That's right." Lisa's face softened. "My baby already thinking about college." "Mom, I know. You're not a baby anymore." Lisa checked her watch, the nice one Mr. Thompson had given her, saying every executive assistant needed to be punctual. "Ready to go?" They walked together, something that still felt like a miracle after years of rushed goodbyes and missed moments. The morning was cool, autumn creeping into the air. Outside the school, Tanya Miller and her father waited by their car. "Morning, Lisa." Mr. Miller called, his tone different now. "We still on for the contract review at 9:30, Lisa corrected smoothly. Mr. Thompson wanted to discuss the new maintenance protocols first. Mr. Miller nodded, looking impressed despite himself. "Of course. See you then." Inside the school, Sarah headed to her first class. Her stomach was full, her supplies were new, and for the first time in years, she wasn't counting the hours until she could check on her mother. "Sarah." Mrs. Reynolds waved her into the library. "How's the youth leadership program going?" "Good. We're planning a community service project. Something about helping kids who need school supplies." The librarian smiled. "Your idea?" Sarah nodded. "Mom says sometimes the best way to handle getting help is to give it to others. Your mother's a wise woman. She is now that she can sleep at night." After school, Sarah walked to Thompson Enterprises. The security guard greeted her by name as she badged in. In the lobby, Max waited with his leash, supervised by the receptionist. "Your mom's in a meeting," the receptionist said. "But she left these for you." She handed Sarah a paper bag of dog treats and a new book about veterinary medicine. Sarah had mentioned wanting to be a vet last week, and somehow her mother had found time to notice, to remember, to provide. "Thanks, Mrs. Chun." Sarah clipped Max's leash on. "How's Amy doing?" The receptionist, Amy's mother smiled. Much better since she started eating lunch with you. And since Mr. Thompson hired me. Sarah led Max outside, remembering how she'd mentioned to her mother that Amy's family was struggling. How her mother had mentioned it to Mr. Thompson. How quietly, without fuss, things had been fixed. They walked their usual route, passing the alley where she'd found Max in the rain. It looked different now, cleaner, with new recycling bins and better lighting. Thompson Enterprises had bought the building last week. Sarah, Mr. Thompson stood at the corner, holding coffee cups. Thought I'd join you today, if that's okay. Sarah nodded. They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Your mother's doing amazing work, he said finally. The new maintenance tracking system she designed? Other companies are asking to license it. Really? Really? She understands what people need, both the clients and the workers. It's rare to find someone who can see both sides. Sarah thought about the school supplies project, about lunch with Amy, about Mrs. Chun at the reception desk. She taught me that, Sarah said. About seeing people, really seeing them. Mr. Thompson nodded. She taught me too. He looked at her carefully. How are you doing? Really? Sarah considered the question. I miss talking to Mom sometimes. She's busier now. But she's happier. And when we do talk, she's really there. Not worried about bills or tired from cleaning all night. They reached the building again. Through the lobby windows, Sarah could see her mother in the conference room, explaining something to a group of suited executives. They were all nodding, taking notes. She's not just surviving anymore, Sarah said softly. She's living. Mr. Thompson touched her shoulder gently. So are you, Sarah? So are you? Max wagged his tail, ready to go inside. Sarah handed his leash to Mr. Thompson, then hugged the dog goodbye. See you tomorrow, boy. Upstairs, her mother's office had a view of the city. On the desk sat 3 framed photos. Sarah's school picture, Lisa's cleaning company ID badge, and a shot of Sarah with Max in the rain. Yellow raincoat bright against the gray day. Remember where you came from, her mother had said. But remember where you're going too. 3 months after the storm that changed everything, Sarah stood in their apartment, hardly recognizing it. Fresh paint covered the walls where water stains had once spread. New curtains hung at the windows, and the broken kitchen cabinet had been replaced. Even the air felt different, clean and fresh instead of damp and musty. The front door opened. Sarah? We'll help here. Her mother struggled through the door, arms full of groceries, real groceries, not just the cheapest options from the discount store. Sarah rushed to help. Mom, did you buy out the whole store? Nearly. Lisa laughed, setting bags on their new kitchen counter. Mr. Thompson's giving everyone bonuses for the maintenance system contract. Thought we'd celebrate. Sarah pulled items from the bags. Fresh fruit, vegetables, meat that wasn't about to expire, brand-name cereal instead of generic. At the bottom of one bag, she found a cake mix. Really? Why not? Lisa started putting groceries away. We've got something to celebrate, don't we? Sarah touched the envelope in her pocket. Her first report from the youth leadership program. Straight A's, and a personal note from the director about her community service project. The school supply drive collected enough for 50 kids, Sarah said. Amy's little sister got her first new backpack ever. I know. Lisa smiled. Mrs. Chun told me at work. She cried a little. A knock at the door interrupted them. Max's familiar bark followed. Come in, Lisa called. Mr. Thompson entered, Max bounding ahead of him. The dog went straight to Sarah, tail wagging furiously. Something smells good, Mr. Thompson said. Just putting away groceries. Lisa gestured at the bags. Join us for dinner? Sarah's making her grandmother's lasagna recipe. The secret family recipe? He raised an eyebrow. I'm honored. Sarah started pulling out ingredients while her mother and Mr. Thompson talked business at the kitchen table. Words like expansion and promotion floated through the air, mixing with the smell of garlic and herbs. The maintenance system's really taking off, Mr. Thompson was saying. 3 major property management companies want to implement it. We'll need to hire more staff. I've got some ideas about that, Lisa said, pulling out her laptop. Remember Maria from my old cleaning crew? She's been managing apartments on the side for years. Sarah smiled to herself, layering noodles in the pan. Her mother's voice was different now. Confident, professional, but still with that core of compassion that made her notice people others overlooked. Max settled at Sarah's feet, hoping for dropped food. She snuck him a piece of cheese, remembering that rainy day in the alley. The scared, shivering dog felt like something from another lifetime. "Sarah?" Mr. Thompson called from the table. "Could you join us for a minute?" She wiped her hands and sat down. Her mother was beaming. "Tell her," Lisa urged. Mr. Thompson pulled out a folder. The Youth Leadership Program board met today. They want to expand the program to other schools. We need a student representative to help design the expansion. Sarah's heart jumped. And they were very impressed by your school supply project. How you identified a need and found a way to fill it. He smiled. "Sound like something you'd be interested in?" "Me? But I'm just the girl who saw a scared dog in the rain and stopped to help," her mother finished. "Just the girl who saved lunch money to pay bills. Just the girl who thinks about others before herself." "Those are exactly the qualities we need," Mr. Thompson said. "What do you say?" Sarah looked around their transformed apartment, at her mother's proud face, at Max dozing peacefully by her feet. 3 months ago, she'd been a hungry kid in a leaky apartment, carrying too many worries for an 11-year-old. "Now, yes," she said. "I want to help." Later, after Mr. Thompson left and the lasagna was in the oven, Sarah and her mother stood at the kitchen window. The sky was growing dark, but no leaks dripped, no drafts blew through cracks in the walls. "Mom? Are you happy?" "Really happy." Lisa pulled her daughter close. "Happier than I've been in years, baby." "Why?" "Sometimes I worry it's all going to disappear. Like with Dad." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "What your father did, leaving us, that was about him, not us. But what's happening now? This is about what we built, what we earned, by helping a dog, by being the kind of people who stop to help, even when it's hard, even when we're scared or cold or hungry." Lisa kissed the top of her head. "That's what Mr. Thompson saw in you that day. What he saw in both of us." The oven timer dinged. As Sarah moved to check the lasagna, she caught her reflection in the window. She wasn't the same scared girl who'd huddled under a too-small raincoat in the storm. That girl had been afraid of hoping, afraid of trusting, afraid of wanting more. This girl, the one in the reflection, stood straight and tall. This girl knew that sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest acts of kindness. That sometimes saving someone else meant saving yourself too. "Mom?" "Yes, baby. I'm keeping my yellow raincoat, even though we can afford a new one now." Lisa smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Good. Some things are worth keeping, even after the storm passes." Outside, the city lights began to twinkle on. Somewhere out there, another kid might be hungry, another family might be struggling, another dog might be lost in the rain. But now Sarah knew something she hadn't known 3 months ago. One person could make a difference. One choice could change everything. One moment of kindness could start a chain reaction that transformed lives. The lasagna was perfect, golden brown and bubbling. Sarah set it on their new dining table while her mother poured drinks. Max watched hopefully from a spot by the window, where he could see both his old home at the Bradley Arms and his new second home here. "To new beginnings," Lisa said, raising her glass. Sarah clinked her glass against her mother's. "To keeping our yellow raincoats." They ate together, mother and daughter, in their warm, dry apartment, while the city hummed around them and possibilities stretched out ahead like rays of sun after a storm. Some people might call it luck, finding that dog in the rain. But Sarah knew better. It wasn't luck. It was choice. The choice to stop. The choice to help. The choice to hope. And she would make that choice again, every single time.